Serving one's country is one of the greatest things a person can do. Protecting our freedoms and rights for our loved ones and for future generations is a very heroic and noble thing. When most people join the military, they know that there is always a chance that they may have to go to war or that harm could in some way come their way. Nothing that the young Navy man that was on board the USS Indianapolis could have ever prepared them for the horrific experience they were about to have to endure. This is their story. The USS Indianapolis was a battleship of the U.S. military. It was named after the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, and was first launched in 1931. It was what was considered at the time a Portland-class heavy cruiser, and was the flagship for the commander of Scouting Force 1 for the first 8 years of its existence, then as flagship for Admiral Raymond Spruance in 1943 and 1944, while he commanded the Fifth Fleet in battles across the Central Pacific during World War II. In July of 1945, the USS Indianapolis made a top-secret high-speed trip to deliver parts of Little Boy, the first nuclear weapon ever used in combat. Little Boy was the codename for the type of atomic bomb dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. It exploded with an energy of approximately 15 kilotons of TNT, and caused widespread death and destruction throughout the city. The Hiroshima bombing was the second man-made nuclear explosion in history, after the Trinity nuclear test. On July 30 of 1945, the men aboard the Indianapolis set forth on their way to the Philippines for training duty. Sadly, the men wouldn't make it. Somewhere between the middle of Guam and the Philippines, the Indianapolis was struck on her starboard side by two Type 95 torpedoes which caused widespread damage to the ship, which came from the Japanese submarine I-58. It was captained by Commander Makatsura Hashimoto, who had mistaken the USS Indianapolis for the USS Idaho. Either way, over 900 of our soldiers were stranded now at the mercy of the Pacific Ocean. As the waves slammed into the ship, knocking it this way and that, it started to overturn, because of the top heaviness of the ship due to the weapons on board. Within 12 minutes, all of the men who survived, and had made it out of the ship into the water, watched as the ship sank to the bottom of the ocean. They clung to whatever they could in the cold, murky depths, as they looked around in all directions with nothing but water in every direction, knowing that they would almost surely die. This would be just the beginning of their horror, though. As the survivors looked around at their fellow friends and soldiers, many were alive, but also, many were severely injured and some were deceased. All they could do while floating in the waves of the ocean was hope and pray that they would be found in time. Some had gathered up floating rations such as Spam, which is a canned, processed meat. The U.S. Navy, however, had no idea that the ship had even been attacked, so no help was sent for at least 3 days. The men were discovered by a plane which was piloted by Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Warren Caldwell, and a PBY-2 piloted by Bill Kitchen. What had happened in the days and nights prior, though, was something so terrifying, it would haunt the dreams of the survivors for the rest of their lives. As the men started to assess their situation and gather what rations they could right after the ship sank, they all tried to gather as close together as they could so that no one would be lost. As their hunger and thirst grew, though, they opened the cans of potted meat to try to curb off their starvation, but in effect attracted many hungry sharks. The Spam wasn't the only thing that had attracted the sharks, though. Many of the dead and bleeding men who were still alive, but injured, was attracting swarms of hungry sharks, which to their terror, started to pick the men off one by one. You can imagine how scared they were as they were floating next to one of their friends and all of a sudden they saw them yanked under the water by a shark, knowing that they could be next. The fear those men must have felt. Many of them who survived, told of being bumped by sharks just before seeing their friends being eaten. Many of the soldiers committed suicide, so they wouldn't have to know what it was like to be eaten by a shark or die of starvation. This went on for 3 long days before they were spotted. First to arrive was an amphibious Catalina patrol plane flown by Lieutenant Commander Robert Marks. Marks and his flight crew spotted the survivors and dropped life rafts. One raft was destroyed by the drop while others were too far away from the exhausted crew. Marks was ordered not to land in the ocean, but he took a vote of his crew and decided to land the aircraft in 12-foot waves. He was able to maneuver his craft to pick up 56 survivors. Space inside the plane was at full capacity, but he knew he couldn't just leave the rest of the men to the mercy of the ocean. He knew by leaving them that they would surely die, so he tied many of the men to a parachute cord and tied that to his plane. Being an amphibious plane, it floated like a boat, but with all the men, it was too heavy to fly. It did, however, keep many of the men afloat until more help could arrive. By disobeying direct orders, Lieutenant Commander Robert Marks helped save the lives of many men who would have otherwise surely drowned. He was a true hero. Only 316 of the nearly 900 men that set forth on the Indianapolis survived. 2 of the rescued survivors, Robert Lee Shipman and Frederick Harrison, died in August 1945 from their injuries after being rescued and brought home. The Indianapolis had been led by Captain Charles McVay III. Captain McVay had led the Indianapolis through many battles that started in November of 1944, successfully all the way up until the sinking of the ship. He was the last to leave the sinking ship, but was still court-martialed on 2 charges, one being failing to order his men to abandon ship and the other being hazarding the ship. What they meant by hazarding the ship was that he failed to zigzag through the torpedoes being sent their way. In all fairness to Captain McVay, it all happened too quickly, and with so much damage to the ship, maybe he had no way of getting the abandoned ship message out. He did stay aboard until almost everyone else was off the ship, which is a credit to his bravery. As far as whether zigzagging would have changed the outcome either way, who knows? People needed someone to blame though, and for many, McVay it was. Merry Christmas. Our family's holiday would be a lot merrier if you hadn't killed my son, read one piece of mail from a family member of one of the soldiers. The blame and guilt was placed on his shoulders and mounted until he committed suicide in 1968, using his Navy-issued revolver. McVay was discovered on his front lawn by his gardener with a toy sailor in one hand and a revolver in the other. He was 70 years old. Expeditions to find the wreckage of the Indianapolis began in 2001 and again in 2005, then again in 2016 and 2017. The wreck was located by Paul Allen's USS Indianapolis project aboard research vessel Petrel on August 19, 2017, at a depth of 18,000 feet. The wreck was revealed to the public on September 13, 2017, in a live TV show on PBS titled USS Indianapolis, Live from the Deep, starring Miles O'Brien. The wreck is well preserved due to the great depth at which Indianapolis rests, among the Rocky Mountain ranges of the North Philippine Sea. On a final note, in the years since, the record of Captain McVay was finally cleared and hopefully he can rest in peace, knowing that he was not to blame for the events of that fateful day, so many years ago, and now, everyone knows it. Hope you enjoyed today's story. Maybe you learned something from it or gained a new appreciation for the sacrifices that our men and women who serve our country give so that we can remain in a free society and hopefully remain safe. To each of the survivors of this tragic event, and to every man and woman who serves in our military, just know that we at GraveyardDance.com thanks you for everything you have done, and you continue to do. Also, we hope you'll consider liking, subscribing and sharing us on social media. Don't forget to ring that bell for future videos. Until next time. Thank you for watching. You can also pick up a t-shirt, hoodie, mask etc. in our shop in the description box below.